Hi. Astrolab 37 is the much more compact version of the full-size Astrolab stage performance instrument. It's got the same brains and sounds, slightly fewer hands-on controls, is much lighter and has minikeys. Like its bigger siblings, Astrolab 37 literally plays plugins in a box. Over 40 of Arturia's instrument plugins in a fully standalone instrument, which means you don't need a computer or audio interface to make music. It includes almost 2,000 presets selected from all of Arturia's software synths. And if you own a license to the software plugins, you get a bunch of additional sounds, and you can create your own presets on a computer and transfer them over to Astrolab. There are plenty of forms of synthesis here, including granular, samples, wavetable, FM, physical modeling, pianos, organs, electric pianos, and more. In this video, I'll take a look at what Astrolab 37 can do, how it compares to others in the series, how to customize its presets using the Analog Lab software, and how to create your own for it using Arturia's software synths, if you own them, and pros and cons compared to the competition. Before I start, a quick disclosure: Arturia sent me Astrolab 37. Other than that, no money changed hands, they have no say over the content of this video, and don't get to see it before it's published. Okay, let's start with an overview by way of comparison to the bigger Astrolab 61 and 88. And I'll start with what's the same. First, probably most importantly, since these instruments are designed to play sounds as opposed to program them, all Astrolabs are capable of playing the same sounds, they run the same firmware, and are preset compatible with each other. They all come with close to 2,000 presets in multiple categories based on different synthesis types. All Astrolabs can run over 40 Arturia instruments that are built in. These are copies of almost all of Arturia's plugins, almost all the plugins in its V collection, as well as a copy of the engine inside Pigments. All of these run standalone without requiring you to connect it to a computer or audio interface. You can browse through the different presets either by general category, by instrument. There are also a few additional categories that aren't included here. You can see that in the types. And if you long press a category, you'll see a few additional subcategories in it. Presets can also be organized by artist packs. These are presets that pay tribute to quite a few artists. So when you dive in, you can immediately explore their style, and there are often more than one per artist. Then you can also group presets by liked presets, by banks, or by playlists, which are also accessible using the playlist button. These are basically shortcuts to your favorite presets, which can be organized in songs. So say if you have a live set, you can swap between multiple presets in a song, and you can also have multiple playlists on board. Now there's an important distinction to be made here. Even though Astrolab comes with the engines of all of these instruments built in on board, you only have access to some presets, which are a subset of what you'd get if you bought the plugin standalone, and it doesn't come with an independent software license for all these plugins. You also don't get to edit all the parameters of these synths. Rather, you only get access to a few macros, and like I'll show you later, a few fader parameters, but you can't actually dive in and edit all the individual parameters of the synth unless you own a license to it sold separately. And regardless, you can't edit all these parameters on Astrolab itself. You'll need to do that on a computer and then transfer the presets over here. Like I mentioned earlier, you get close to 2,000 presets with Astrolab 37, but if you own V Collection and Pigments, you'll have access to a total of over 15,000 presets. You do, however, get access to the Analog Lab software. This pairs up with any Astrolab and lets you manage its sounds and edit a few parameters that you don't have access to on the panel. This interaction with Analog Lab, by the way, is identical regardless of which Astrolab you get. And you can also use Analog Lab as a plugin independently of Astrolab on your computer, either with or without Astrolab connected to it as a controller. All Astrolabs can play 2 timbres or parts or presets at a time, either in a layer or in a split. Now, while you don't need the Analog Lab software connected to Astrolab, when they're linked together, then Analog Lab acts as kind of like a big screen for whatever's going on here. Any parameters that you change here will show up in the software, and vice versa. Any changes you make in the software will appear here as well. So for example, changing the brightness in the software will appear on Astrolab, except when diving into the actual plugin. We'll talk about that later. In terms of using this as a performance instrument, presets may take a few seconds to load. You can keep a sound held until the next preset loads up, and then the next note you play will cut off the previous sound. When you swap a preset, the icons will first be a little dim and smaller, and then they'll zoom in when the preset loads up. When you see them zoom in, it means that it's ready to be played. These transitions are relatively fast for most synth presets, but sometimes sample-based presets may take a bit longer to load. So everything we saw up until now is what's going on in the inside, and in that respect, the two are pretty much identical. In terms of hands-on controls, things start to diverge a bit. Let's start with what's similar though. All Astrolabs have 4 instrument sound design endless macro encoders, a mod wheel, and mono aftertouch. By macros, I mean that each of these can control 1 or more different patch parameters depending on how the preset is programmed. And then on the right are 4 effects parameter knobs. These 2 are common to all Astrolabs. There's a volume control that's common to both. The pitch and mod wheels are also common to all Astrolabs, as are the octave controls, though there are no octave LEDs here. Also common to all Astrolabs are the 10 preset category selection buttons. On all Astrolabs, these also double as favorites, like I mentioned earlier. When in playlist mode, all Astrolabs also have a built-in arpeggiator and a chord mode, as well as built-in scales and arp hold. We'll talk about these later. And then all Astrolabs have a similar navigation workflow, so you can browse presets either using this detent encoder or this big encoder over here, or go back and forth through presets by using these arrow buttons. There's a back button on both, and shift lets you access all the secondary labeled parameters. Onboard storage is also about the same, with 23 gigs in total, of which about 9 are taken. And then finally, this screen also seems to me to be the same size and quality on both. It's an LCD screen that does look great from above, but loses a bit of contrast if you're looking at it from a very shallow angle. So what are the differences between the full-size Astrolabs and the 37? The biggest and most obvious difference is the size, and what isn't apparent visually is the weight difference. Astrolab 61 weighs a hefty 10 kilos or 22 pounds, while Astrolab 37 weighs only around 2 kilos or 4.4 pounds. So light that initially I thought the package it came in might be empty. Despite that, the build quality feels great, just like Astrolab 61. The top and sides are firm plastic, and the bottom panel is metal. Besides that, as you can see, the endless encoder placement is different. I think it's better here, by the way, on both sides of the screen. And then all of the controls are slightly smaller. Most obvious are, of course, the mini keys. By the way, not all mini keys are created equal. Arturia's are 9 centimeters deep, and the 3 octaves are 46 centimeters wide, as opposed to some mini keys which are more cramped or less deep. The endless encoders, while a bit smaller, still feel super solid, actually packed slightly less tighter here. And then another difference you'll notice immediately is the screen encoder. In Astrolab 37, the screen encoder now sits under the screen, but I actually prefer Astrolab 37's encoder. First thing, it's a detent encoder, so you can actually feel little clicks as you move it from item to item, as opposed to the encoder on the full-size Astrolabs, which is smooth, though it does play little clicks to help you know when you're moving from item to item. Also, selecting items works better here. If you don't use two fingers, if you sort of choose an item and then press down to select, then you're less likely to select something else as you push down. Whereas on the full-size Astrolabs, I could sometimes find myself choosing the wrong item unless I stopped and focused on pressing down. Besides that, they work the same, so a long press will open up this little contextual menu, or shift and press does the same thing. Same goes here. A long press or shift press is kind of like a right click with a few preset options. Moving on, another important difference, which is a disadvantage for the 37, is that we no longer have LED rings around the encoders. The encoders on Astrolab 37 are still capacitive touch encoders, and you'll see their value if you touch them on screen. And if you change the value, you'll see that on screen, but the font here is pretty small, whereas on the large Astrolabs, while they too have capacitive touch, you see these large, nice LED rings constantly give you an idea of their value. The LED rings on the full-size Astrolabs are also color coordinated, which is useful in multi-part presets. So when they're blue, you're controlling parameters that are applicable to both presets. When they're orange or a bright yellow, you're controlling a parameter related to part 1. Same goes for these, by the way. If I press part 1, you'll notice all the LED values are orange and they're green when controlling part 2 parameters. These effect buttons help save face a little bit for Astrolab 37. These do light up based on the part they control, orange or green, at least for the insert effects. For some reason, the delay and reverb are always blue, even if they apply to just one part. Speaking of multi-part presets, Astrolab 37 doesn't have any dedicated buttons for selecting parts or determining splits. Astrolab 37 can still do splits and layers with some limitations. Unless you use it with the Analog Lab software, the 4 instrument knobs will always control only master level parameters, meaning parameters that apply to the multi altogether. That's what happens here when these encoders are blue. There's no way that I know of to move these to a mode where they control individual part parameters like you can here. Besides the LED rings, we also don't get an LED strip for the mod wheel, which isn't that much of a loss, but we did lose the LEDs above the keys, which is a bit of a bummer because they're helpful in identifying split points across the keyboard. It may be hard to see on camera, but this part is orange and this part is green. Currently, you need to either feel your way around to find the split point, or you can dive into the MIDI menu and look for the split point in here. Also removed from Astrolab 37 is the MIDI looper, along with its play and record buttons. There's no MIDI looper in here, not even in a menu, at least not in the current firmware. Okay, let's move on and take a look at connectivity because things here are a bit different too. First, the similarities. All Astrolabs have MIDI in and out ports, 1/4-inch headphone and stereo outputs, a sustain pedal jack, a USB-C jack for MIDI and connecting to the Analog Lab software, and a USB Type-A jack to connect to storage or to an external MIDI controller. All Astrolabs also have Wi-Fi connectivity to manage the synth using an available mobile app. Unfortunately, you can't sync with Analog Lab over Wi-Fi. And also Bluetooth to stream audio into the instrument, say if you want to play along a backing track. So that's what's the same. The differences are that Astrolab 37 has a single combo jack for incoming audio, say to use with the vocoder, along with its gain control knob, whereas the full-size Astrolabs have a stereo input pair. The full-size Astrolabs also have 3 additional pedal jacks, expression, and 2 auxiliary. Okay, so that's it for the overview and the differences. Let's dive in and look at what we've got to work with in terms of sound design after loading a preset. I already mentioned Aftertouch in the mod wheel. Typically Aftertouch will add brightness, but it can do anything else, and the mod wheel will add vibrato or tremolo, though it's not mapped in all the presets. Same goes for the endless instrument encoders. They might do anything, but typically they'll control brightness, timbre, which could be resonance, but could be anything else depending on the synth. Time typically controls an envelope. So here you can hear it's a filter envelope, but in different presets it could be a different envelope. Say, for example, I'm looking for one where I get some decay, which I'm not getting here. Maybe let's go for a lead sound. Okay, so here you can see controls release time. And then movement is typically an LFO wiggling something, but again, it could be anything. Don't think it does much here. Let's try here. Again, these don't always do something significant. Let's try something else. Okay. So an LFO depth and rate here. With shift, by the way, you can control a preset's volume and EQ. So those are pretty much the sound design controls we get on the instrument level. And if we like what we created here, we can always long press and save this as a new preset. Let's move on and take a look at the effects side. I'll load up an ePiano for this. We've got 2 configurable insert effects slots and then delay and reverb effects slots. It's important to say that these effects are in addition to any effect that may live inside the synth plugin engine. So for example, if I turn off all of these effects, this is just our electric piano playing, and if I increase movement, you can hear this stereo panning effect, which is an effect that's built into this plugin. I have a license to this plugin, so if I go in and open up the plugin and go into the effects tab, you can see that all of these effects are active and are part of the plugin engine regardless of these effects. These 4 effects slots are effects that live outside the plugin. So I could go ahead and edit these and add any of these effects that I want in this insert slot. Let's say go for distortion. And as you can see, there are a few effect parameters here. But if I just exit this, this will control my distortion mix. And you get access to a secondary parameter with shift, which in this case is the drive amount or effects intensity. If I pull up Analog Lab, I don't have to, but I have this synced right now. You can see that as we change this, it changes the drive amount. By the way, as long as we have Analog Lab connected, as I choose different effects here, you'll also see it reflected on screen. Anyway, that's effects slot 1. With its dry wet mix, there's another effect slot. In this case, it's a flanger. Then I can also activate a delay and a reverb. These control the effect return level or just effect level, not sends. And we can swap out any of these as well with a long tap. These are the tape options, and these are all the reverb options. Shift, by the way, for the delay controls the delay time. And a shift here controls the reverb decay. Okay, so up until now we looked at controlling a single part preset. The plot thickens a bit when controlling presets that have 2 sounds or parts. Unlike Astrolab 61 or 88, you can't create your own multi on board. You'll need the Analog Lab software for that, but you can load up and play multi-instrument presets like this one or this one without any problems. And like last time, I didn't practice this because I don't want to get a copyright strike. So like I mentioned earlier, the 4 instrument encoders control the blue parameters, meaning the master level patch parameters that apply to one or more of the preset parts based on how it was designed. So for example, this controls the speed and pitch of the beat, but it also controls the timbre of this sound. So you can't control the 2 independently of each other. Same goes for brightness, unless the person that designed the patch specifically set the blue knob to control one of the parameters. Like I mentioned earlier, you can't select a part and control it independently of another, at least not while you're untethered. If you've got Analog Lab connected, then as long as this column is highlighted, you're indeed controlling the blue parameters that apply to both parts. But if you select any one of these columns, as you can see, the macro knob colors change, and we are now controlling the parameters of either one part or the other. Same goes for the effects, as hopefully you can see here on camera. Both of these are lit up in orange, but if I were to take one and transfer it to the other part, then this lights up in green. I can take both and move them to part 2. I can also choose not to send one or either part to the reverb or delay. These don't light up in different colors for some reason, but as you can see, they now apply just to one part. And if you want all the effects to apply to both parts, you just click here and link them together and they all light up in blue. Let's look at a few more ways where Analog Lab acts as a screen for Astrolab when you're connected to a computer. There's this pretty calm overview screen which gives you a bird's eye view of what's going on. Besides being pretty, you can see parameter values here and also easily see the split point and change it if you want by dragging each of the layers back and forth. So it's way easier to create splits or layers this way without diving into the MIDI menu here. I think that's pretty much as far as this screen goes. Things get more interesting in this screen. If you click the little keyboard settings button here, you get control not only of the splits or layers, but you can also transpose each of the parts up or down, which is particularly important for a 3-octave keyboard. You can choose which MIDI channels each part listens to and how it's affected or whether it's affected by any of these sources. Again, you can do all this here in the MIDI menu. It's just way less fun. Now, there are a few more hidden goodies here. For this, things will need to get a little bit more complex. We'll click this little cogwheel button, and if we head on out to the MIDI tab, you can unlock 9 additional parameters. If you select this +9 faders option, we now get, in addition to our 4 macro knobs and 4 effects knobs, direct control of up to 9 additional parameters. And these are not only 9 additional parameters. If we hit edit preset, you'll see that you've got master level controls, which apply to both parts in a multi, and then per part controls if we click any of the part columns. So this is a bit of a cheat code for those of you that don't own the full licenses to the actual plugin instruments. You'll get access to all these fader parameters regardless. If you do own the plugin, then you can customize what these faders do. So if you hit the assign button, then the full plugin will open up and we can choose any parameter we want to assign to over here. So again, you need to own the full version of Pigments in this case to be able to make these assignments. But even if you don't, these are 9 additional controls you get regardless. These can be very interesting controls, by the way. So say, for example, for organs, these give you access to drawbars. Now, using these with a mouse is a bit of a bummer, but once you've tuned it the way you like it, you can still save this as a new preset. If you've got a little MIDI controller around the house, you can actually map it to control these parameters using these MIDI CCs. This one is USB powered, so I can just plug it in the back. I created a little preset here that is mapped to Astrolab. I can now use the faders to control my drawbars. And since this has 8 faders, there's one more to control the 9th parameter. Anyway, once you made these mappings, they'll work on any patch. So let's say in this patch, I can control the envelope, say shorten release and attack times, increase the attack, increase the release. And you can see the parameter names here. So you don't even need the software to see what it is you're controlling. Now, when we control multis, then by default, this controls the master. But if we choose the individual parts, then these parameters will map to the part parameters. Just one more nice example. We've got control of the different operator levels here for FM or DX7 based sounds, and control over the algorithm. So you can change the sound pretty drastically just by changing the algorithm. This again, without owning a copy of this plugin. Just a simple MIDI controller will unlock parameters that you just don't have access to using the basic 4 encoders. Okay, let's look at a few more things you can do with the software. Like I mentioned earlier, while you can't create multis with Astrolab 37 standalone like you can on the larger ones, it's very easy when hooked up to a computer with Analog Lab. Just click an empty part and load up any patch you like into it, then hit done when you're done. You can always replace any part in a multi just as easily by selecting a new part. Let's take a look at a few more things you can do within Analog Lab. You can obviously browse Astrolab's preset library. You can edit playlists here as well. So remember, playlists are made of songs and then presets within songs. So you can move these around very easily. You can drag and drop presets from the library onto a playlist. You can add presets to playlists, by the way, through here as well with a long press. We need to save this first because we changed it. Speaking of which, we can rename presets here, but you can also rename them on Analog Lab. Anyway, once we've saved a preset, we can assign it to a playlist from here as well. So let's say add it to this one and to this song. Okay, so up until now, we talked about what we can do with Astrolab 37 standalone, what we can do with Astrolab 37 paired with Analog Lab, and we talked a little bit about what you can do if you own a license to one or more of Arturia's plugins. One of the most important things you'll probably want to do if you want to take this or this to a performance is customize what the macro knobs do. So like we saw earlier, for some reason in this preset, the movement knob doesn't do much. To see what it controls, we need to go into the macros tab over here on the right. This will show us what each and every one of these macro knobs does. You can see that time, for example, here controls 2 parameters, like I mentioned earlier. It's the filter envelope. You can't customize these without owning the plugin, but you can change the curve if you want. So if you want to play with the response of the knob, you can do that. Anyway, back to movement over here. This controls the LFO's amplitude. Maybe if I move this a bit, we'll start to hear it a bit more. Anyway, if I wanted to control something completely different, I'd need to hit learn here. And again, if you own the plugin, you can map this to any one of these knobs. Let's do something drastic and control the range over here. Let's open this up and increase this curve. Now, even though, as you can see on screen, when I move this knob, the octave range changes, we're not hearing anything. Because once you edit any synth parameters, unfortunately, at least as of the current firmware, Astrolab gets decoupled from the preset. So any changes I make here won't impact the sound at all. For us to hear this, we'll need to go into here, hit save on Astrolab as, let's call this octave. And I hope Jean-Michel doesn't mind that I use his name for this. Anyway, now, octave control works nicely based on the curve. So a bit of a hassle, but works pretty nicely. A few important caveats though. First, there may be a disparity at any time between the plugin versions available in Analog Lab or for a computer and the plugin versions available for Astrolab. When I made my first Astrolab video, there were quite a few plugins that weren't available at all. Arturia has caught up since then for the most part. However, as I make this video, new versions of CP70 and MiniFreak 4 aren't yet supported on any of the Astrolabs. That's because the version of MiniFreak here is MiniFreak 3. So say if I go into my library and look for any MiniFreak presets, then if they were made with MiniFreak 3, like this one, it'll transfer just fine. Or let's say this one. It works very nicely. But since the version of MiniFreak that I have on my computer is actually MiniFreak 4, then if I tried to save this to Astrolab, it wouldn't work until they update this to MiniFreak 4, which I'm told by Arturia is coming. Besides that, Mellotron V isn't one of the supported instruments here, and likely isn't coming because it's been that way since Astrolab 61 came out. My guess is that it's a licensing thing, otherwise they would have made it by now. But you do have a sampler instrument here, which includes a few presets, including a few that are named and sound suspiciously like Mellotron patches. The thing is, at least as of the current firmware, you can't edit any sampler parameters or patches in Analog Lab, if you say want to work on presets that would work both on Astrolab and on Analog Lab. So that issue doesn't apply to anything but the Mellotron sounds, but I thought you should know. Also, sampler presets are based on the SFZ format, which is an open multi-sample format. You can't import SFZ files, at least not currently. Hopefully Arturia adds that feature in the future, though I asked for that feature in my Astrolab 61 review, so don't hold your breath for it to come. So that's Analog Lab and V Collection. Let's take a look at a few other things you can do on board here. You've got an arpeggiator, like I mentioned earlier. You can hold it and edit its parameters with a long press. As you can see, change its rate and type. Octave range, which parts it applies to, and lock makes sure it doesn't reset between patches. Then we've also got a chord mode, which will play a full chord when you press a single key, and you can hold chord and program your own chords. And either with or without chord mode, you can lock the keys into a scale and choose what that scale would be. And scales work outside of chord mode too. Moving on, Arturia offers an app, which you can pair to Astrolab using this menu. You simply scan the QR code and you're in. Once you've got them synced up, you can choose presets on the app, and that will be reflected on the synth, or vice versa. You can like presets from here. You can search for presets. Probably most importantly, if they're your sounds, then you can also rename your presets from here, so you don't need to bother with the menu over here. And if you like, you can also control synth parameters from here, going into sound edit on a per part basis. So any parameters that I change on the synth will change here, and vice versa. What else? We can also tweak the effects from here and go into the sound store and download patches we already own onto here, which is pretty cool. Speaking of the sound store, by the way, it's easier to find the free banks over here. Okay, let's talk about pros and cons for Astrolab 37. The main pro for it, which applies also to the full-size Astrolabs, is the same as I mentioned in my original Astrolab 61 review. If you need a portable standalone keyboard-based performance instrument with the largest timbral range possible, there's nothing that I know of that comes close, certainly not at this price, even at the price of Astrolab 61. Even if all Astrolab had was the Pigments synth engine, it would be an industry-leading standalone synth. Add to that the dozens of engines you can find in here that Arturia created over the years, and you've got quite a standalone instrument at a very reasonable price. And now that Astrolab 37 has come along, assuming 3 octaves and mini keys are sufficient for your needs, you've got all of these in a very light and affordable package. Now, of course, these are performance instruments or stage keys, meaning you absolutely can't edit every single parameter in these synths on board. But the question is, how many parameters do you actually need to change in real time in a performance situation? If it's more than 4 per preset with a mod wheel and aftertouch, this isn't for you. But if it is, there are plenty of presets here to choose from, and if you own the licenses to one or more of these instruments, then you can tailor these to control pretty much anything you want. Now remember, these engines come at an additional cost beyond the instrument. By the way, if you do intend to buy one or more of these, sometimes they go on ridiculous sales, for example on Black Friday, so you can always start without and then upgrade if you see the opportunity. Now, these minimalist controls aren't the only con. While you probably won't find a workstation with so many synth engines, other workstations based on a smaller number of engines can still go very far and have more polyphony, as well as play more than 2 timbres at a time. So for example, I'll show the polyphony limitations of the various instruments on screen now, and these may drop further if you use complex presets. You may find a workstation with a very large polyphony count, which allows for rich soundscapes with splits and layers that can compensate for a relatively small number of synth engines. Also, like I mentioned previously, seamless sound transitions aren't always available, or may cut off sounds abruptly as opposed to crossfading from one to the other. Also, it might take a few seconds for patches to load, based on whether they include samples or not. And besides that, another competitor to consider is a computer with an audio interface and a MIDI keyboard running Analog Lab, V-Collection, or one of the many other plugins available. That has the potential for both more polyphony and more hands-on controls if you get a controller with a lot of faders and knobs. A few other cons, like I mentioned earlier, sometimes it takes Arturia a while to update the plugins in here to the versions available in V-Collection. You may not be able to install presets from a new version until they do. I also mentioned the issue of Mellotron presets not being able to go back and forth, at least not as of this firmware. And then some of the reverbs in the various plugins don't work on the hardware, but you always get the built-in reverb effect regardless. Besides that, I have a few wish list items. I'd like the pop-up with the parameter value and name to be bigger to compensate for the lack of LED rings. It would also be great if there was a visual way to see the split or layer of a multi-part patch. You also can't tell which octave you're on unless you press these buttons and you look on the screen. Arturia has found out ways to do that on their other instruments, so that should be pretty easy. Then finally, assuming you do own the various plugin versions, it would be great if any change you made in the plugin would automatically sync back to Astrolab. Currently, the two disconnect once you start editing a patch, and you need to save it to Astrolab in order to hear it, or set up Analog Lab that Astrolab triggers both its internal preset and the analog preset. I think it should just be a seamless back and forth. Finally, since this has Wi-Fi, it would be great if this would sync with your computer over Wi-Fi and not over USB-C. This connection can cause ground loop buzz. You can solve this by either using an isolator on the output or an isolator on the USB cable. I made a video about these, but it would be best if you just didn't need to plug in USB-C at all, and you could just sync back and forth over Wi-Fi. So that's it for Astrolab 37. If you like the insights in this video, there are plenty more in my ever-expanding book of electronic music ideas, tips, and tricks, available to the people who support this channel on Patreon. Hit like if this was useful, ring the YouTube bell below if you want to make sure you don't miss the next one. Thanks for watching.
Thank you.